I keep thinking, this is time I'll never get back. That's something I've seen a lot of people say online lately, especially as the new year has started. And it kind of makes sense, really. There's a lot of relationships we haven't been able to put effort into building. There's a lot of activities and experiences we could have had if there hadn't been a lockdown. So staying at home sometimes really feels like you're wasting your life. I guess there's just this big sense of wasted time. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Even if you imagine you will live to 100 years old, a whole year at home is quite a significant chunk of that life. Hi guys, it's Harma again. I'm here with another video where I talk a little bit about living a creative life. A background to that is my life of faith, my Christian faith, and how that interacts with trying to be an artist and a creative person. So one thing I really wanted to talk about is this feeling of waste that a lot of people are experiencing because of the pandemic. We have this real obsession in our culture about self-actualization, getting ahead, achieving success, making the most of your life. And it's really up to the individual to take their life and make it into something. I think that's why there was such strong messaging at the beginning of the pandemic about don't waste your quarantine, make sure you use it. We have a real horror of wasting time and not achieving things and not having something to show for our life. It's a valid question that people ask, am I wasting my time? And you can also see why such a strange and unstable time like this would make you look at your life and think about all the things you want to achieve and think about what's preventing you from achieving those things. So it's very true. The pandemic is affecting our ability to build relationships with people. It's affecting our ability to achieve some of the things in our jobs that we want to achieve, or some of the experiences that we want to have in our life, traveling, visiting relatives, making friends. There's all sorts of things that it's actually keeping us from doing. So that's can be a really frustrating thing. And it's no wonder people sit back and try to look at their life and try to think, what am I doing with my life? I don't know. Yeah, it's a difficult time. I've been seeing a lot of people expressing those kinds of thoughts lately. This fear that maybe we're wasting our time when there's a lot of things that are restricted, a lot of things that we really felt like we wanted to do and we can't do them. We have this real strong feeling of loss, but also this anxiety that we'll never be able to make up for that loss. I think that's why at first people came up with all these lists of courses and things you can learn online and all of this stuff you can do during your quarantine. Of course, we very quickly realized that when there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, it's not very easy to self-actualize yourself because you're distracted and worried, and it can be a lot of pressure on yourself by giving yourself these goals and feeling like you have to make the most of every moment while at the same time emotionally dealing with everything that's going on. It's really a lot. It's really difficult to do that. Very quickly, there was this counter message of, oh, this is a really stressful time. A lot of people don't have the mental energy to be able to do all this stuff. They don't have the mental energy to be able to stay super productive because this is so unstable and it's so hard to know what's going to happen next. To have this big burden of, oh, I've also got to make the most of this time even though I feel like there might not be a future, is a very stressful thing. So part of the problem, I think, is this way our culture really puts an emphasis on success and puts an emphasis on developing yourself as an individual to reach this great pinnacle that is the purpose of your life in some way. I agree, it's good to have goals in your life and know where you're going, but having this idea of your life being worthwhile if you achieve this self-actualization is really paralyzing, and it is really counterproductive because you can have this kind of anxiety over whether what you're doing has a point or not. One of the things with thinking about your life in terms of self-actualization is that you look at your activities and you try to evaluate where they're bringing you, and you can think, is this really what I should be doing? So on one hand, we all have this real strong urge to make sure our life is worthwhile and that we use our time really well. And on the other hand, we understand that putting a lot of pressure on ourselves can make us really anxious and can be counterproductive. It's good to have that pressure taken off a bit, but at the same time, we do live with this nagging question, what is the meaning of what I'm doing? And that is part of with this whole lockdown. We're really made to face that question, and we're brought face to face with it in a way that maybe we never got a chance to face before. And every time something is restricted or taken out of our lives, it is a time that we can think about what we actually want to be doing and what we actually find fulfillment in. I wanted to talk about two things that can help us with our perspective as we're going through a time where we wonder what the point of everything is. It's a bit silly to be talking about the benefits of this time, but I don't think it's bad to know there's a few things that are helpful, as well as all of the hard stuff that we have to go through. Most of us have been brought to a place where we have to cut out a few things in our life, and I think there is some aspects of that that are really beneficial to think about. Really, there's two main areas that I want to talk about where we can find something from this time period and bring it to the rest of our future lives. The first thing that we can learn during this time is about how to find joy in the small things. And that's such a cliche way of saying it, but I think we have gotten very used to spending a lot of money on a really big trip and flying somewhere very exotic and exciting. Somewhere that maybe we saw on Instagram in which people took amazing photos of and we totally want to be like them. Or spending a lot of money for a weekend at a music festival and just having this experience at the music festival. Or even going to like a really cool new restaurant in the city. So all of these like really cool and exciting things that make our life look really exciting on social media. And I don't think that's the only reason we do it, but it does look good on social media, so we want to do these things. So now that there's a pandemic, there's a lot of this stuff that's completely cut out of our lives. So we're being forced to simplify our lives. We're being forced to stay home and look at our home and be like, is this a place I want to spend time? And if I don't want to spend time in my home, why not? So rather than putting up with things and just getting through the week and thinking ahead, oh, I'm going on this great vacation, we're forced to look at some of these things that have been annoying us a little bit and thinking about the quality of our ordinary life a lot more. And I think a lot of people are really seeing the joy that is in an ordinary life, and that is the amazing learning side of this whole experience. There's less of this pressure to be this glamorous Instagram adventurer and more of this, what's in my own backyard? What's exciting and cool about what's in my own backyard, and not in just the city, but in your literal backyard. Like people are getting into gardening and then seeing the little seeds come up and being like, wow, this is what it looks like to watch something grow. And it sounds so boring, like watching the grass grow, but it isn't actually. It's a huge miracle that anything is alive and coming up out of the ground. So in that way, it forces us to really appreciate these small things a lot more. So another thing is a lot of people have been walking a lot more around their cities, and you get to know your neighbors a little bit and you really get to know your streets. There's nowhere to go except close by. So you start to see what's beautiful about where you actually are instead of trying to achieve this beauty that doesn't exist nearby. instead of running in this rat race, trying to find beauty somewhere else and capture this feeling. A lot of times this feeling of enjoyment and fulfillment can be found in really small things. And we know that because we're taught that when we're kids, but sometimes we don't really believe it. So we have to be put in a situation where you're made to appreciate small things and small experiences and do things like bake sourdough bread, take up a project around the house, go see what's in your own city that you never even knew was there. So what I actually really love is going outside and just seeing so many people outside and enjoying fresh air and enjoying the city and really knowing what the city that I live in has to offer. Like where I live, it can get pretty cold in the winter. So it's pretty cool to see it doesn't stop people, because there is something refreshing and fulfilling about just getting out of your house, connecting with the neighborhood, and learning more about where you are. And you can feel as refreshed as traveling abroad somewhere. So the second thing that I found really helpful is the process of creation. And this is a really challenging thing because it's hard to be creative when you're all uptight and paralyzed and anxious. So I totally get that this can be daunting. It's very daunting for me sometimes. But on the other hand, it's really shocking how small acts of putting something out into the world can really change the way you think about things in your brain. It's like flipping a switch from just being like a consumer to being a creator. It can really give a lot of meaning to your life. And I think that's why a lot of people are doing things like making sourdough bread and gardening and doing home projects, is because you feel that sense of fulfillment with those little projects when you are doing them and when you finish them. Now, if it's super daunting to get anything done, sometimes you got to break it down incredibly small. So for me as a writer, sometimes it's just opening my notebook. And I have to tell myself, it's okay if you don't write a single word, just open the notebook. Because that's such a barrier. You can't even pick it up because you're so scared, because you're so intimidated by the process of creating anything. However, I promise you, if you start just a little bit, you'll feel so amazing about your time. And that's kind of crazy because whether there's a pandemic on or not, the act of creating something does give you that feeling of getting somewhere. So you would think we don't need restrictions before we realize this, but we actually do, because we can be distracted by the things that we want to consume instead of what we can actually produce. So it's probably a good thing that we're forced to think about what we want to produce. But there's huge challenges with the thought of being creative, especially in an unstable time. And a lot of us are too uptight and paralyzed by a lot of things to really have that mental stamina in order to push through and push something out into the world. That takes an enormous amount of strength and energy. So if you haven't been able to be creative at all, that's completely understandable and that's completely expected. So one strategy that I found, and I've had to use this a lot, sometimes you just have to break down the steps a lot. And I mean a lot, like an insane amount. For me as a writer, it can be just opening the notebook. That's the only thing that you have on your to-do list for today. And crazily enough, sometimes breaking it down that much helps. Once you get your brain into a pattern of, I am doing something instead of enduring something, even if it's doing something so tiny, like I'm opening my notebook, then you are in that different mental world of doing things and creating things. And sometimes you are able to take those next steps, and you're building a habit. So you're building a habit of, what do I need to do every day in order to be in a place where I might be creating things? So if every day I'm opening my notebook, I am much closer to actually writing a novel than if I never ever touch my notebook. So that's just one little thing I found helped for me. Another challenge with creation and being creative in this time is that a lot of times you need external input to really feel like you can put something together. So you might need a lot of interaction with other people, so you know what kind of social interactions to write about. You need all kinds of stimulus about things that you never thought about before. And so if you're restricted from seeing tons of people, then you really get cut down on these opportunities to observe people and to have different ideas come at you. I don't know a lot of people that are creatively inspired by arguments on Facebook and all the Twitter feeds. Like, honestly, you can get a lot of ideas that way, but you generally are not creatively spurred on to come up with some kind of novel that's based on a Twitter thread. Not very often. I'm sure it could happen. So what actually helps a lot for being creative is this face-to-face, going out into the world, doing things, and that's really restricted. But once again, that's where this small, ordinary life kind of activities can really be good for you, because you can really focus in on small experiences and try to do creation around that. So something really, really tiny, like going out to your local coffee shop to buy a coffee. What kind of thoughts does that bring up for you? Why does it make you happy? Is it important? So you can write about things like that. Or just go out into the world and do some skating, do some walking. A lot of those kinds of stimulus, the physical activity, seeing different things around you, and seeing people from a distance can really give you some of that creative inspiration that you need, some of that external stimulus. As humans, we kind of like to try on different faces in different environments mentally, and that's good for us. And I think that's part of why our brain sometimes needs this external input before we can produce things and create things. So we're all facing different levels of restriction. Some of us might not notice very much difference at all right now, whereas others might be in deep lockdown where they can only leave the house once. There's a lot of people out there whose experiences are totally different from mine, and I can't even begin to fathom it. So these are just some general thoughts about experiencing ordinary life again and finding joy in the very, very ordinary, as well as what creativity is able to do for you. And this can be so small, such small acts of creation that can give you a different perspective. I'm just giving some general ideas and thoughts, and you guys can all take that and run with it for what works in your life. And lastly, I wanted to bring Christian faith into it a little bit. So thank you so much for listening to me talk again. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. If you got something out of it, you should